morning, everybody. So, what a gift to be back here at the beginning of a new year with all of you. See you all again, and new faces, and to be with Hannah Rose. What a gift. So, this is the time of year when we take time to look back, review the year past, and to take stock of where we are so that we can end the prior year with clarity. And that clarity can inform our direction and our intention as we move ahead into the new year. So, as I began that process of review and taking stock, it took a long time. It was a very hard year. The crisis of leadership in our country and climate change and the uncertainty about the future all added weight to this yearly ritual. But I did emerge with clarity about two things, and they're reflected in the readings. That to reclaim our future, we must change our present, and to change the present, we must make a defining choice against empire and for Earth community. And as Joanna Macy says, knowing that we have a snowball's chance in hell, but also sensing everywhere this readiness to wake up. I reflected on how to make that defining choice for Earth community with more depth, intention, and creativity in this new year. So the truth is, we don't know how to do it. Chickasaw writer Linda Hogan's words really spoke to me. There is no map that says this way, no road through, no path known, no map, no direction. The cairns and markers have all been taken away and broken. Who knows where to step? So what I wanted to talk about this morning was my own journey through that impasse of not knowing what to do, how to step, how to amplify a defining choice for Earth community. So as I sat with the year past, what showed up everywhere was the devastation of empire and that paradigm of power. The UN Chief of Biodiversity warned that we have 2 years to reach a global agreement or humanity will watch whole ecosystems collapse as species become extinct. From the Climate Change Summit in Poland, David Attenborough warned, if we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon. Joanna Macy says, the loss of certainty that there will be a future is the pivotal psycho-spiritual reality of our time. And I felt that at the end of the year. In the networks that I work with and collaborate with, we see this collapse. In communities in the earth already devastated by empire, by a voracious expansion going on right now of mining, dams, drilling, and fracking, a last grab for energy to fuel addictive consumer societies that results in water poisoned, forests felled, fires and flood, and people fleeing, militarization, violence targeting those who resist, trauma in people, trauma in the earth. Paradise, California, in ashes. From the Amazon, one community testified that their entire generation of their children died when the river that is their home, their paradise, since a time before empire, was poisoned by petroleum extraction. In October of last year, a mass exodus of the people from Central America put the human face of this collapse on US newspapers. They came in caravans, some 10,000, mostly from Honduras, a land that has been militarized in the service of empire, made so unlivable that people are literally leaving on foot. My friend in Honduras, human rights defender Berto Oliva, says, how can you stop this avalanche of people who have nothing left to lose. From El Paso, Texas, my friend Jean, who I've talked about before here, she's usually in and out of jail doing civil disobedience, and now she's in and out of detention centers because her work is on migration. I met with her in Washington recently. She had this hacking cough. She had been sleeping on cold floors with migrant families, with sick children. The ICE detention centers on the border are all over capacity, so they're releasing large groups of people to community shelters. Annunciation House in El Paso was one of these shelters. They're receiving hundreds and hundreds of people per week from ICE. ICE releases them if they have someone anywhere in this country who will buy them a bus ticket, a Greytown bus ticket to somewhere, anywhere. And they put a shackle on their ankle, a tracking shackle, and they release them to the community centers. But Annunciation House, like so many others, are full and overflowing. So Annunciation House is renting out 2 Best Western hotels, every room in the entire inn, just to put people for one night, if they have a bus ticket, so they can sleep in a bed and have a hot shower before they get on the bus. Jean was overwhelmed. She said, "I'll give you just this one story." And so I'm bringing it to you today. She said her job that morning was to take a young woman to the bus station. She had a ticket to North Carolina. They got to the counter and she had to sign her name. She reached into the hand-woven bag over her shoulder and took out a piece of paper with her name written in big black letters. And she traced each letter onto her ticket. The trip was going to involve 7 transfers. So the agent carefully explained this journey in Spanish. By the 5th transfer, Jean said she was sobbing and shaking. It was at that point she realized she didn't speak Spanish. She was indigenous from Guatemala. So together they worked to create a map of dots so that they could kind of visually work her through it. And she found other passengers on the bus who could help her make the first couple transfers. She said, and then we made her a sign, and the sign, a big sign, and it said, "I do not read or write. I don't speak English or Spanish. I'm trying to get to North Carolina. Please help me." Then in Nicaragua, our safe place, our refuge, it too erupted in crisis this year. An internal conflict suddenly became violent, and Nicaragua was also in the crosshairs of multiple empires. And old scripts and patterns and traumas and wounds of the past are reconstellated with shocking speed and intensity, and people are afraid war will come again. And at a gathering in DC on the rise of hate crimes and organizations in the United States, John Paul Lederach, who's a Mennonite peacemaker and scholar on conflict transformation, he says, people there were concerned about the deepening divides in the United States and concerned it could carry us into war. Many people across our land face violence on a daily basis, and it already feels like war to them. But they were asking me about full-blown civil war. I had 7 empirical indicators from my field of study, and I told them there is reason to be concerned. So I sat with all of this, and there was this sense of powerlessness, of sorrow, that our holding actions, our accompaniment, our resistance, our healing, our advocacy, our peace work, although indispensable, was not enough, that some peace was broken. And there was also this tremendous gratitude for the beauty and the support of the natural world, the waters, the land, the marshes, the sky, the sand, and the grass, for the blessing of the horses. And everywhere I go, this readiness to wake up, a deep aching for reverence for the earth, for a way to change our present and reclaim our future and to take this troubled beauty forward. But the question was there, how to do it, where to step, when everything we know to do seems insufficient, not enough, and I was searching for something deeper. I could find no answer in the usual places, in the networks and the organizations that I work with. They too were searching. I found no book, no think tank, no workshop that lays out the strategy or the plan. It's not on the internet, and yes, I did Google it multiple times. And finally, I accepted that I was at a place of impasse. The Institute for Communal Contemplation and Dialogue says that we're experiencing impasse as individuals and as a society, and they even have a list of symptoms. So as you reflect on your life on this earth, do you experience a sense of powerlessness, a feeling that things have gotten so complex that you don't have answers anymore, a sense of futility, that as you continue your work of transformation, that it is not enough or not adequate, that it just isn't working? Is there low-grade anger or grief that never leaves you? And do you continue to believe that as a citizen of this earth, you must do something? This is an experience of impasse. And the way through impasse that they have found is contemplation, to sit with the unknowing in a state of mindfulness, in a place between thoughts without rushing to grab for a solution prematurely. And in this waiting, we are met by an experience, by an aliveness that is not controlled by us. It's been described as a state of awareness, a sacredness, in which even our words turn back. Theologian Belden Lane says impasse has great value, and there's potential in impasse. Impasse, he says, constitutes a negative pressure on our imagination. It throws us toward the intuitive, the symbolic, unconventional, a radical breaking out of the conceptual blocks that limit our thinking. And it throws us towards creative new ways of being and acting, not yet imagined, towards epiphanies, towards intelligences that are lost from us but are waiting for our return. So the way, they say, is waiting, receptive, being open, staying in that place of unknowing, in that place between thoughts without rushing to grab or control. This is not the way of empire. And Gregory Bateson, an environmentalist and philosopher, says, the great crises of our world are the result of the difference between how nature works and the way people think. We have been trained to think in ways that we hardly notice. There are times, he says, I catch myself thinking that there is something that is not connected to something else. But the mind is much more than the brain in our head. The mind is the tree root that grows around a rock. It is the way that the river otters play. It was the horses that helped me find my way through impasse and back into that mind that is connected to everything else, back to the earth's way of thinking. I had a trip planned to Honduras. I was going with a colleague from Switzerland. His name is Daniel. Several years ago, he'd been on our accompaniment team, and he was accompanying a community up in the north that was resisting a gold mine. And he had been kidnapped at gunpoint with another member of our team for getting in the way, for trying to stop the mining. And after his release, the Swiss government said he had to leave the country immediately. And finally, after several years, he had negotiated his permission to return to Honduras, and I had planned to go with him. And as the trip neared, I could not focus, I could not pack. My suitcase sat there empty and open. My head said go, and my body said no. I was at an impasse. And I knew what was blocking. There had been yet another murder that hit way too close to home. It showed me that the space we had to accompany communities and human rights defenders at risk had been battered into a crevice. And it left me questioning everything we knew how to do. I couldn't resolve that impasse, and there were just days to go before I had to leave. So I took it to the horses. And I found them in the high pasture, the furthest one out. There's a low depression in the land there where the old horse is buried. And as I approached them, one by one, each of them lifted their heads and came up the hill towards me, and crossed over to the high point on the other end of the pasture. One horse named Gus came right up to me. So I put my hand on his back, and he walked me up to this high point on the ridge, and we stood there together, looking out at the land rolling on and on before us. Soft and beautiful, with so many shades of green, a splash of lavender and gold, an entire row of sunflowers that I had never seen before, although I walk that way often. And we stood, and I heard myself exclaim out loud, "It is all so beautiful." And we stood in silence, waiting, receptive. And then Gus turned and he placed his forehead right here on my forehead. And he stood with me like that for a very long time. This horse, the youngest, the most playful, the one who's always on the move, this day, he stood still, forehead softly pressed to mine. And we crossed a threshold into that other mind where everything is connected. And after a long while, I took a step back. But Gus stepped forward again, put his forehead to mine, and held me still. I found this poem by Hermann Hesse, and I think it describes what happened that day. Sometimes, when a bird cries out, or the wind sweeps through a tree, when a horse nickers softly, or a dog howls in a far-off farm, I hold still and listen a long time. My soul turns and goes back to the place where 1,000 forgotten years ago, the bird, the horse, the blowing wind were like me and were my sisters. My soul turns into a tree. My soul turns into a horse and a cloud bank. And then changed and odd, it comes home. And it asks me questions. I hold still and listen a long time. What shall I reply? So I called Honduras, and for the first time I said, I'm not going to make that trip. Within days of Daniel's arrival, he had a death threat. He had to leave the country immediately. The crevice was narrowing. I was able to help navigate a safe exit for him. We set up a series of meetings in DC at the UN so that he could talk about the closing of space, about the collapse. And then he came to Fenville to rest and recover and reconnect. So I took him to the horses. And a young rescue horse named Prince had just arrived. His life had also recently been at risk. And Danielle and I went into his paddock. And Danielle reached out, placed his hand on that horse. We hold still. We listened for a long time. And then Danielle said, I've never touched a horse before. He is so strong. He's so powerful and so gentle. This isn't the power I know. If there's one thing that human beings associate with horses, it's power. And their power was taken and used by empire for war, for conquest, for domination, to take land and resources. And we too, as human beings, have been trained in that way of thinking, in that paradigm of power. But this is not the horse's way of power. The way of the horse is the way of power with, of non-predatory power, of a power that values cooperation, collaboration, relationship, intuition, process, connection, and reluctance to use force. And they tell us we can find our way back to this way and this intelligence, to this way of empowered interdependence, because it goes deep enough to change the present and reclaim the future. Last summer, when the conflict erupted in Nicaragua, in a flash, the peace community within living in Nicaragua was also split into hostile camps. And I attempted to straddle the divide, being pulled by a midst of a flurries from both sides asking me to do this, say that, tell them this, tell them that. And I desperately wanted to do something that could get things under control and settle things and stop this conflict amongst even the peacemakers. But each time I grasped for a solution, I knew nothing I knew to do was deep enough to restore connection. I was at impasse again, and I sat in the unknowing without rushing to grab a solution prematurely, tolerating the powerlessness, waiting, staying open. And there was one poem that became my anchor in that storm. It's by Pradrick Otuma from a Center for Mediation and Peace Building in Northern Ireland. This was the anchor. He said, at the end of the day, the reality is that whether we change or whether we stay the same, these questions remain. Who are we to be with one another? And how are we to be with one another? And what to do with all those memories of all those funerals? And what about those present, whose past was blasted far beyond their future? I wake, you wake, she wakes, he wakes, they wake, we wake, and we take this troubled beauty forward. And then one day, in my inbox, there was a message. It said, Dear Jenny, at this time of political upheaval and shock that is causing so much suffering and groundlessness, would you lead a silent retreat of women? 3 days of silence in liminal time on the land? And I said, yes. That goes deep enough. So we were 20 women, some from Nicaragua who I'd worked with through the war, one from Colombia who I hadn't seen for 14 years. And into the silence we went for 3 days, onto forest, meadow, and stream. And in that silence, each was met by the natural world and the ways and intelligences of the earth community. For one woman, her meeting was with the asters in the meadow. For another, she was met by a stand of pine trees. For another, it was a turtle, a pair of stags, a stream, a wet stone, a tangle of tall grass. One woman said, I was like a feral animal these days. I was all over this place. and everything was speaking to me, but the deepest connection was with a thistle. Linda Hogan says, there are ways in to journey to the center of life, through time, matter, dream, and thought. The ways in are not always mapped or charted, but sometimes being lost, if there is such a thing, is the sweetest place to be. And as always in this search, a person might find that she is already there at the center of the world. It may be broken, but it is glorious still. And in that silent, receptive, waiting, wandering on the land, we were met, we held still, we listened a long time, and in our closing circle, each woman shared her reply, her own unique way to make a defining choice for Earth community, to take this troubled beauty forward. And over the last few months, I've had this recurring dream. I can't summons it or control it, can't grab it. It just meets me. It comes as a gift. I see a green road. It's wide and soft and made of long grass. There are thick stands of tall trees on both sides. I can smell this tangy orange scent of evergreen, and I see myself on that road. And I hear a voice that knows my name and says, "Oh, there you are, Jenny. Good to see you here. Keep your feet on this good green road." And this dream is full of aliveness and possibility and readiness to wake up. And it seems now that everywhere I go, I keep seeing this good green road. I see it in efforts to divest from empire, to live with less, to create a new economy. Winona LaDuke, Native American leader from Minnesota, is a Harvard-trained economist, and she says empire economy doesn't work. We have to create a new one. Small-scale, community-centered, earth-minded, sustainable, and she's doing it. For her, it is planting hemp for fiber that she will spin as thread to replace cotton and create green jobs. Her fields are plowed and fertilized with horsepower. And she and her horses continue to carry out their holding actions to stop pipelines, but they are also creating something new, something alive. In December, I was in Washington again, and I could see this green road even there. An aliveness, a readiness for this cohort of newly elected women leaders to arrive. Their offices were being painted, and there was an energy. And so this year, in the 2019 Congress, 100 women will serve in the House, the first time in history. The first 2 Native American women, the first 2 Latina women from Texas, the first 2 Muslim women, and from New York, the youngest woman ever to serve. And they are backed by a generation of young, diverse leaders and activists and grassroots citizens, and they're calling for a Green New Deal, and they won't settle for less, and they are determined to make that defining choice for Earth community. I see this green road in the work of my friend Tupac, in the desert in Arizona, in his work with indigenous rights and spirituality at the Tona Tierra Community Center. They too are receiving 30 to 40 families a time from ICE. ICE brings them to Tona Tierra, and Tupac tells me, ICE cannot enter our center. Their jurisdiction stops at our sidewalk. We welcome the families with a ceremony. We welcome them as relatives. We tell them, you are now on indigenous territory. This is not the United States. No human being is illegal. And the indigenous people see their symbols on our building, And together we remember a time before borders divided us. They leave with some dignity restored, some healing happens. That ceremony, he says, makes a difference. Ceremony is about cognitive rebellion. And after cognitive rebellion comes regeneration. This too is the Green Road. I couldn't come here today and be here with Hannah without mentioning Berta Cáceres. In November, 7 men were convicted for her murder in Honduras. The intellectual authors continue to be protected and enjoy impunity, will not face justice most likely. But even this small measure of justice was beyond anything imagined. And people continue her struggle so that her river can live as a river in creative ways never before imagined. And in this Congress, the Berta Cáceres Human Rights in Honduras Act will be reintroduced because we have wild imaginations and we're going to keep it alive. And in Copemish, Michigan, just north of here, there's this man named David Milvarch, just a regular Western Michigan man. And you can read his story in a book called The Man Who Planted Trees. In a nutshell, he had been declared medically dead because of too much alcohol. But then he woke up and he came back to life with a vision of the earth without trees that he had had when he was dead, and a readiness to do something about it with the rest of his life. And so he's formed the Archangel Ancient Tree Archive, just north of here. And they have little seedlings from all over the world, from the ancient old trees from all over the world in this archive. And their mission is to save the world's ancient trees. In December, they planted 75 redwood saplings in San Francisco, the offspring of the oldest trees on this part of the continent. And he tells us that trees are a crucial part of the solution to global warming. That if each person plants 4 trees and cares for them until maturity, it would make a measurable difference in carbon sequestration. This too is part of the Green Road. And I see this Green Road here at C3 in your series of teachings last year on the environment, on the formation of a political action committee. I understand there's some reconnection happening with folks at Pine Ridge or with Remembrance. And in your new environmental pledge that I've seen. And then this morning with Dr. Cleveland's bright green sweater. There it was. So as we begin this new year, may the negative pressure of our impasse throw us towards imagination and regeneration and epiphanies. And may we deepen our defining choice for Earth community. May we find our way back to the Earth's way of thinking, to her ways and intelligences. And may we put our feet on the good green road, change our present, reclaim our future. May we wake, and may we take this troubled beauty forward. Happy New Year.